Good morning and welcome to Godcast. Today I want to give you kind of a scenario or just a brief description of the Old Testament. A lot of people get so confused reading the Old Testament, and it's really not confusing once you understand a few principles. So Genesis, the book of Genesis, starts out with creation, covers 2,000 years. This sets up the royal family for Jesus, the line of Jesus. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the founding fathers of Israel. They're called the patriarchs. Goes on to the end of Genesis where Jacob has 12 sons. Those 12 sons become Israel. They become known as the nation of Israel. They become the nation of Israel by a famine. Famine in the Bible means a spiritual emptiness. It means they've turned away from God. That God has to shake them up a little bit to turn them back to Him. So what happens? Joseph, one of the sons, is given away by his brothers to some slave owners, and he ends up being in Egypt. Joseph was an interpreter of dreams. The Pharaoh at that time had a dream. Joseph was in prison, and Joseph, the cupbearer, tells him there was someone in prison who told me my dream, so he can tell you your dream. So they call for Joseph, and Joseph tells him his dream, and it's about a famine coming. You can prepare for it for 7 years, and then there's going to be a famine for 7 years. So he says, well, who in the world? I need a smart man to do this. And Joseph gives him some advice, and he says, well, you're the smartest man I know. You become second to me, no one else. So Pharaoh 1, Joseph 2, he gets powerful. This is God. God's protecting his people. He's going to create a nation. So the famine comes, and they get really bad. And so even people from Canaan, this is where Jacob and his other 11 brothers live, is in Canaan. So they come for food. There's a long story there. I need to read that. But they come to Egypt during the famine for food. They come to live with Joseph. And so now Israel is starting to be formed. Now they're in Egypt for 400 years. Joseph's name has been forgotten. All that he did for the people has been forgotten. There's a new Pharaoh in town, and he no longer favors the Hebrews. So they've become kind of slaves. They are building idols and temples and pyramids and things like that for the Pharaoh. So they've been praying for someone to come rescue them. And Moses does. That's a long story. I need to read that. But Moses was under the Pharaoh's house. Now he's escaped because he killed someone. He escaped for 40 years. But God sends him back. He says, I'm sending you to go save your people. So Moses goes to save his people. And this time when they're fixing to leave, he had to bargain with Pharaoh for a little while. And after 10 plagues, which their pagan gods could not save them from, God kills the firstborn of everyone that does not have the blood of a lamb over their doorstep. Now that's symbolic of the blood of Jesus saving you and me. So they escape from Egypt. They're allowed to leave Egypt. And this time, 70 people, 400 years went into Egypt. This time, millions are going out. Says the Bible. In the Bible, when they did a count, it was over almost 700,000 men, not including women, children, and servants or wives. So they're in the desert for 40 years. Exodus tells us they're in the desert for 40 years, and this 40 years is a cleansing time. They had to get rid of the old pagan ways, and that they had to know the God of heaven. So they're in the land for 40 years. Exodus is where they get the 10 Commandments. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai and gets the 10 Commandments. So from there, it's time for Moses to die. 40 years have passed. They've got a new generation of people in. God has prepared to go into the Promised Land. Joshua leads them into the Promised Land. Joshua goes in and they conquer. And then after they've conquered the Promised Land, they divide it up by lots into who gets what. Okay. When Joshua dies, God brings judges into the land. Judges are all over the different lands. So if something happens or they have problems or issues, the judges would either go in. Samson was a judge also. So after the judges went away, and things got pretty bad, Samuel comes along. Samuel is a prophet and a priest. Samuel lives with Eli the priest, for a while. And Eli has two sons that are pretty bad. Well, what they would do is they would do ungodly things. I mean, they were very unclean. They would take the meat before it's cooked. They would, were stingy. They were just very ungodly. God warns Eli about that. He doesn't fix it. So anyway, God kills them. So Samuel now is the only prophet in the land who is doing God's work. He goes into a land or into a city or something, and they kind of tremble. Why is he here? Why is he here? What have we done? So anyway, the people start asking for a king because they want to be like all the other nations around them. They start asking for a king, and Samuel takes it personal because I've done everything you've asked me, Lord. I'm trying to do the best I can. He said, it's not you they're rebelling against, it's me they're rebelling against. So they're rebelling against God because they want a king. So already Israel, this promised land that God gave them, is already starting to worship other gods. So he gives them a king. The first king of Israel is Saul. Saul is a Benjamite. Very important. You need to know what tribe all of these kings come from. Makes a difference. Saul is a Benjamite from the tribe of Benjamin. And he goes in, and his character is not the best, but God chooses him. And the problem with the kings is they have to go out and fight the land because the people didn't kill all the Philistines and the Canaanites when they were supposed to. So now the kings have got to do that. So he goes out and he kills his people. And then they come up against Goliath that they can't kill. He's a big giant. And he's had him hold down for 40 days and 40 nights. Now that number 40... There were 40 years in the desert. It rained with Noah's Ark, 40 days and 40 nights. 40 is a time of trial and testing. So David comes along. He's about 14, 15 years old. He's been keeping sheep. That's all he knows how to do, keep sheep. He knows how to play music. God's given him a gift of music. And he says, what's going on here? Why aren't y'all out fighting? And everybody's just laying back, this giant's over there and calling, just making fun of him and everything. And he says, well, there's a giant out there. We can't kill him. We're scared of him. He says, oh, I can do that. Not a problem. He takes 5 stones from the riverbank. He walks over this big giant, makes fun of him. You little peon, what are you going to do? Takes that slingshot, throws 1 stone, and hits him right between the eyes. David becomes a hero after that. A hero. But no one knows it. He's been anointed as king, or anointed as the next king by Samuel. He tells no one until Saul's reign is over. But Saul gets to where he starts hating David. He starts hating. He sees where the people are worshiping him because he's more powerful. He's killing Philistines like left and right. But to understand these stories of the kings, in the Bible you have Kings 1 and Kings 2. But you have also Chronicles 1 and 2. The best way to understand this in the Bible is to get a chronological Bible. It'll put them in order because they go together. Kings 1 and 2, it'll get in, and the more you get into the kings, it'll talk about the kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. The kings of Judah and the kings of Israel. It gets very confusing, very confusing. If you go to Chronicles, same thing. It talks about the prophets of Israel and Judah and the kings of Israel and Judah. It gets very confusing. Well, what happens is, read it in chronological order. We go through David, and then David dies, and he has a son named Solomon. And Solomon's not his firstborn, but he promises Bathsheba that Solomon would be the next in heir. So Solomon becomes king. Solomon builds all these castles. He builds the temple, and he also builds pagan temples to his pagan wives. Big mistake. He was married, I think he had 300 wives and 600 concubines. Not good. So anyway, when Solomon dies, the kingdom is divided. Rehoboam is the son of Solomon. Rehoboam gets in there, and he's a spoiled rich kid is what he is. Well, in the meantime, Jeroboam was one of Solomon's servants that helped build all of these palaces, and the people respected him. He was a good, honest person who, didn't work them to death. He gave them time off. He was a good leader. So they wanted Jeroboam as their leader. So Jeroboam said, go in, or the people went to Jeroboam and said, go into the king and see if he'll just, relax on us. We've been working for 40 years, building all of these temples and things. Please just let him go a little bit easier on us. So he goes to Rehoboam, Solomon's son, asks his friends, and his friend says, they're just getting lazy, double their work. Oh my goodness, wrong thing to say. So it went back to the people, they rebelled, and they wanted to make Jeroboam king. So this is where Israel is divided. Israel becomes two nations. Now we've got Judah in the bottom, you've got Benjamin and Judah make up the nation of Judah. You've got the other 10 brothers make up the nation of the northern tribes of Israel. This is where it's divided. This is where you'll see Israel does this, Judah does that. Israel does this, Judah does that. Well, let me tell you this. Every king in the northern 10 tribes worships pagan gods. Jeroboam is the first king. He brings in idolatry. He makes an idol in Bethel, and he makes another idol in Dan. And he did not want people going to Jerusalem because he was afraid they would go down there and settle and not come back. People had to go to Jerusalem for their holidays and their feast times, and he was afraid they would not come back. So he built 2 golden idols and put one in northern Israel and southern Israel. Right before you get, Bethel is only a few miles from Jerusalem. He didn't even want them to go those few miles. So he made sure it was right there at the border. Every king in Israel, the northern 10 tribes, was evil. Now Judah wasn't much better. They had some good kings and they had some bad kings. But one of the best kings they had was Hezekiah, and you really need to study Hezekiah. Hezekiah did a lot of good things. He was looking forward to the future. God gave him that gift to see that they would need a genealogy of the priests and the people because of the captivity. He built a water system under Jerusalem so that they would have water when it gets cut off. He doubled the wall in Jerusalem. He made a fortified wall. There was just one single wall that went around the temple. He fortified the wall. He made it like 10, 12 feet wide, a double wall, because later on, Judah would get captured, and it takes them longer to get captured once they have a fortified wall. So then, about 732 BC, the northern 10 tribes, they get captured by the Assyrians. And this is because they've turned to idolatry so bad that God just he has to fix it so bad. Judah's not quite as bad yet. This is when Hezekiah was king, and he said, oh, please, Lord, I've been faithful, I've been good, give me 4 years, because he was on his deathbed. And he didn't have a son. So God says, okay, I'll give you 15 more years. So during that time, a couple of things happen. He has a son, and he also has some friends that come visit, and he says, let me show you what I've got. Look at all this beautiful kingdom. Look at the treasures in my storehouse. Look at everything I have. And the prophet comes up and says, what have you done? He said, well, I showed them everything I have. No, you didn't. He said, yes, I did. I showed them everything I have. He said, your kingdom is going to be torn from you. It's going to be taken away from you. So his son was named Manasseh. He dies 15 years later. Manasseh takes over at a young age. He was a young king. He forgets everything his father did. He becomes an evil king, and he sacrificed children, but Manasseh sacrificed children to God in the fire. He sacrificed children in the fire. From there on, it goes downhill. And 150 years later, Judah is captured, and that's when we get to Babylon. I know I've been kind of sketchy here, and I've gone through a lot of things, but I've just kind of given you the main details of what you need to know about the Old Testament. The rest of the Old Testament, the prophets talk about prophetic things that are going to happen. It also talks about trying to save Israel and Judah. But just because it talks about saving Israel and Judah, that applies to us today. We are worshiping things that we shouldn't be worshiping. First thing we worship is money. Next thing we worship is careers and popularity and cars and social media, anything like that. We have a lot of idols in our life that we just need to get rid of. We need to put God first. The Old Testament is not just talking about the people, the Jews of Israel and Judah. It's talking about you and me. The New Testament starts with 400 years of not hearing from God, and they want calling for help, and they want a sign from God, and they send Jesus, and they don't recognize him. They don't recognize the Son of God, the one they've been looking for. So anyway, that's the Old Testament in about 20 minutes, and I hope that helps you study as you go. Get a chronological Bible, because you will need it. It helps a lot in understanding the differences between Israel and Judah. Please share this message. Help me share the gospel. Please subscribe and share. Times are getting close, folks. You see what's happening in the world today. There's a darkness that's coming over us that it's a spiritual darkness. If you don't get right with God, if you don't get right with the Lord, where you start seeing light in your day, where you want to start helping people, look at the people in North Carolina and Tennessee and Georgia that have gotten hit by these hurricanes. If it weren't for the people in the mountains helping each other, they'd all die because the government's done nothing. People helping people. That's what God's about. People helping people, loving the God of heaven and depending on him to take care of you. And he will. He will. So I just pray that you will share the gospel, share this message. Thank you.